Welcome, welcome. We will get started here in a moment. I'm going to give folks a chance to ease on in here. So if you don't have anything to write with, this is going to be an interactive 30 minutes. So grab you something to write with so that you can engage with us along the way. And we'll get started at 2 minutes after. Just giving folks a chance to hop on, but welcome. So we're going to go ahead and get started because I like to respect folks' time and I want to end on time. Welcome. My name is Dr. Annice Fisher. I'm the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching. And I'm excited to talk to you about our Leading Through Change series. We're going to be walking through our P.R.E.P framework. This is a framework that we use with folks in practice, but this portion of it is what we make public for folks to be able to use. And so today we're going to be focused on the first step in that, which is called preserving what matters. So just a little bit about us as an organization, if you are unfamiliar with us. So our focus is to help folks build the leadership infrastructure so that as you are going through the change process, people are aligned, people are accountable, and there's a steadiness. Some people run from change. We actually love it. All my jobs before I became an entrepreneur for the first 10 years of my career was moving around the country, launching new things, whether it was functional areas, whether it was strategies, whether it was bringing on new teams in the higher education space. So I actually like the change process. So how do we do that? How do we build that leadership infrastructure? What we found is that most people don't have a challenge where there's a lack of capable people to be able to lead through a change effort sometimes, but what we find is that people haven't necessarily built the leadership infrastructure around that change for it to be sustained. So we start off with systems diagnostics. So what that means is we have a proprietary systems change leadership index to help the leaders who are actually the people at the forefront of the change get a sense of where they are based on our systems change principles. And then we have an organizational climate diagnostic, which lets you know where your friction points are, where you're aligned, and where do you need to build some practices into the organization in order to sustain yourself through the change process. So that really gives us a 30,000-foot picture, and it allows us to have alignment. And then we move into offering leadership labs and accelerators. For folks who are working closely to that work, that's a combination of group leadership development workshops around adaptive leadership, systems change, organizational practices for resilience, work around data-informed decision-making, accountability, and so forth. And our two entry points are either at the senior level, that's the lab, or we come in at the middle manager level, which is accelerators. And we work across multiple sectors. So public and social impact, foundations, folks in the government space, criminal legal system. We work with folks around probation. We work with folks in diversion and so forth, and then in the private sector. So our tagline, if you remember nothing I say, I'm going to say this a few times. Systems do not change themselves, people do, because it is your people who are actually powering those systems. So we have to center our people, we have to care about our people, and we have to think deeply about how are we building that infrastructure around them for the change process. You can scan this and learn a little bit about me, but I think it's important for you to understand my positionality. I've been doing this work for over 20 years. I've advised people at the mayor level on down to boards, to heads of agencies, superintendents, all around this idea of systems change. How do you make sure you measure the change and that it's impactful? How do you make sure that people are bought into the change? How do you deal with the resistance to the change? And how do you do it in a way that builds organizational trust honors fairness in the process. I take an asset-based approach to my work, so I'm Gallup trained. I'm also trained in a unique methodology called immunity to change. And it's what it looks at is helping people to understand why do they resist the change and then get at the underlying root causes of why they're resisting the change, but doing it in a way that's not shaming people. And then, as I shared with you before, we use diagnostics, leadership diagnostics that I've created to be able to go in and measure the work that we're doing. So every organization will go through change or disruption. So let me see here in our very intimate group, how many of you are going through some version of a change or disruption right now? You could just put it in the chat box. Okay. And you're probably noticing that you're going through this disruption, but your people are really feeling it. So both of you are going through some level of disruption. And the part that we always want to name is that this is going to be our current state. You know, if we pay attention to local, global, and national right now in the United States, we're going to be going through periods of disruption and change. Experts are saying for the next 10 to 15 years. And I don't say that to scare people, but I say it because the reality is if we know that's the case, then we have to be thinking about what is the infrastructure that we're building around our people? What are we doing to ensure that like people don't burn out, but that we are actually able to adjust what needs to be adjusted and preserve what needs to be preserved. So I want to ask you all in the chat box, when you think about the change or disruption that your organization is going through right now, what's one word or phrase that comes up for you? And you can put it in the chat box. What's one word or phrase that's coming up for you right now when you think about the change or disruption? Okay. Okay. We see the political context and the opportunity for realignment. Then I would say if we were to poll different people's levels in the organization, would they see the change as an opportunity for realignment, or would you have sort of camps? Some people that would say, this is an opportunity. Some other people would say, this is not a good idea. And then you have some people maybe that are fence sitters, just kind of in the middle. And you can respond in the chat box if you like, if you don't want to come off mute because we're recording. I respect either way. There's no right or wrong answer here. Okay. And then when we see the government piece, and you say that that's the one word that comes up, what does that mean? Is it that you're being impacted by those policy changes in your organization? Yeah, so some people are looking forward to it, and some people are those folks that are just kind of like suspense sitters. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. And so you're being impacted by some of those changes, I imagine, that's happening in the congressional space. So part of this framework around sustainable change. So once a quarter to the end of the year, we're going to cover one of these points. So today we're going to cover preserving what matters, the importance of anchoring your team through the change process. The next time we're going to cover recognize the human impact. We're going to do that one in quarter two. Quarter three, how do you embed resilience practices? And then we will end on propelling, which is sustaining momentum. And so that last one is really important because oftentimes we get over the hump of releasing the new initiative or whatever change it is that we are doing in our organization, but we haven't really built the plan for sustaining the momentum after the fact. Because there are going to be highs, there's going to be lows, there's going to be challenges. So how do you keep the stamina of yourself, your stakeholders, your teams throughout this entire process? So one of the concepts that we're going to talk about right now is this idea of preserving what matters. And it's this concept of anchoring people before you go deep into the change. So let me ask this before we get into this part of the framework. When you were releasing your change in the organization, or maybe what you've seen before in the past, was there any kind of conversation that talked to people about, here's what we're going to preserve? Was that the first part of the conversation? We're going to preserve these 3, 4, 5 things. Was that ever a part of the conversation? And you might have to think about it from another organization, if you're not sitting in that space now. I see, like, no, we often come and say, hey, let me tell you about what we're going to do. This is going to be phenomenal. It's going to improve our customer experience, our client experience. It's going to bring in, more revenue. Maybe we can, give people bonuses. It's going to make it easier for folks to access us if we integrate the woeful AI that people are worried about, it's going to be allowing us to do our job with more efficiency. Sometimes we jump right into all the things that we want to change. And part of preserving what matters and anchoring people really rests on this concept of being able to recognize, number one, that if you don't anchor people, they're going to be anxious. It's just natural. But as a leader, it's your responsibility. If you are connected to the rollout of this change, it is your responsibility to let folks know what is going to remain stable. So, what are the things we're not changing? And I said this morning on my LinkedIn. I'm like, the most stabilizing thing people can do right now for their teams is to tell them what's remaining stable. And it seems counterproductive, but it doesn't when people's blood pressures are raised and they're worried about what's the next thing that's happening. The second thing is making it very clear what is not up for negotiation. So as we go through this period of what is not up for negotiation, for some people, it may be that, we had to adjust the way we talk about this work in order to get funding from foundations. But what's not changing is our core values. Those are not up for negotiation in our organization. The core services are not up for negotiation. How we talk about that with the public might have to shift because right now we still need to bring in dollars. We're not financially independent. And I know this is hard for people right now because there's multiple camps. There's a camp that says, keep it all front and center. And there's a camp that says, throw it out with the wind, right? But I think there's something in the middle of that, which is what needs to remain stable and what will not be up for negotiation, but that will still allow you to be in operation because there are people still that's depending on you and your services, right? And the last thing is what commitments are not going to shift. So it's going to be if we're going to automate, what commitments are not going to shift. I was at an event, and I'm based in Chicago, in downtown Chicago. And it was at an event with a number of people in the banking industry. And so I was having, conversation over appetizers with folks saying, have you all started to ready your teams and have conversations around what digital currency is going to do to the banking industry? Because we all know it's coming, right? We all know digital currency is coming. It's not very far away. We all know that the dollar is shifting. So how are we thinking about it right now on what's not going to change or what's going to happen to me as a consumer 5 years from now when I go into Bank of America or I go into Chase and there's nobody greeting me when I go in to cash my check, right? And so we can look at that and say, it's horrible. They shouldn't replace jobs. There's definitely room for that. Yes, we don't want people to lose their jobs, but you still have to have people there that is supporting whatever it is, whatever processes that you're shifting. So how are we being mindful of what commitments are not going to shift? It could be that my commitment is no matter what, no matter how much we integrate automation or AI, there's always going to be a human interaction factor to our work at the first point of entry. I'm just, I'm thinking about this from a global lens. I don't know what type of organizations you all are a part of. And I try not to get too in the weeds on these because we do record it and I don't want anybody's business on our YouTube, which is why we have people put it in the chat box. But any questions about this sort of anchor point before I go to the next one? And you can put it in the chat box if you have any questions. So I'm going to lead you through a series of questions. And here's where I want you to, use your pen and paper. Oh, I see you putting contactless. Thank you for putting this in the chat box. I imagine with this idea of contactless services with self-help, that's a huge disruption right now. I'm imagining. There's some feelings around that, like that you still need a, you said no.
So, hi, Team Medi, social worker. I noted self help and self service and contactless because I can share that through the experience of the pandemic. That was something that my perspective being trained to do that because of the circumstances that we were in. And
Wow.
I actually have a QR code behind me,
Yeah.
which is to be able to help support um, anyone that I work with, just generally in the community. But this is more so built through Play Lab, which is also part of National Association of Educators, because I'm also a school social worker. So a lot of teachers have this QR code to be able to help students learn how to utilize AI appropriately.
Yeah.
But the work behind it, this is a tool that can help streamline resources. So I'm one person trying to connect with so
Right.
many people. So
Yeah.
this is helpful while, for example, you have your own background that says, your company name, and I'm able to go on Google and
Right.
search it, and it's your brand, your logo allows you to be able to reach more people.
Mm-hmm.
So even after this session, I plan on sending it to my team, True Reform. So again, it just shows how
Yeah.
AI,
Yes.
online,
Yes.
self-help tools are available for people, and then that contactless um that we had to go through the pandemic, which is still what we're kind of utilizing now, because everything is scan
Yes.
use your phone to scan something, but then also in the school setting there's a no phone policy thing. So that's where
Right.
I'm on the fence between what's appropriate and then what we're being trained to utilize to be able to
Right.
navigate the world, and then how we're transitioning into this technology type of
Right.
um lifestyle.
Thank you for sharing that because that was initially like a major disruption when technology started coming into schools. We used to do a lot more work in school districts and with charter management organizations, not as much anymore. But that was a big deal when principals and superintendents or chief execs at charter management organizations were introducing this idea of utilizing this like online platforms to support coaching students and families and to support them in the social work lens. But social workers, even some of them that may have been resistant in the beginning, was like, oh, this helps because it's not me with 75 or 80 students. I just think about, if you went to a traditional college experience, you have to wait forever at the health center or to forever to get a counseling appointment. And so, but part of it is it doesn't necessarily erase the human component, right? But how then do we do it in such a way that people remain stable during that transition? So, what I always ask people is this is what I've already shared with you. So, this isn't a secret, but this is a question for you to ask yourself. If you're leading an initiative, or for you to ask your team, what's going to be stable? And so, if we were to use this context of the integration of sort of contactless from a self help lens, what might remain stable is the first point of entry passes through a social worker in the school, right? You have to go through them. There's some sort of automatic intake form that allows that person to sort, or some automation that helps them to sort in a way that gets them pointed in the right direction. That's always going to remain stable. Or what always will remain stable is someone is checking the case notes once a week to make sure there's nothing that doesn't have to be triaged in person. So what are those stable, anchor points for us during this particular transition process? And be very specific about it. And then what core values or commitments cannot be compromised? I cannot underscore this enough. Is having a conversation around the core values with your team and what cannot be compromised no matter what. Because when we begin to invite other people in, and sometimes we're the other people as a consulting organization, when you begin to invite other people into the table, which we could be very helpful to you, but you have to know what are you not compromising. And sometimes in the entrepreneurial space, we say, don't let things become mission creep, right? Don't let people come and sort of eat along with what's important to you. And so having that conversation with your team, or if somebody reports, if you're reporting into someone, having that conversation with your supervisor, like, hey, what core values or commitments are we not compromising on this project? And then the first two can be great, but if you don't clearly communicate it, it's going to fall by the wayside. And so knowing what will not be changed, knowing what will be preserved and what's stable renders itself null and void if you have not clearly communicated it to people. And that communication loop is essential because I imagine, as you were sharing about your reform initiative, that you come alongside and support people. You've probably seen where rollouts have been botched when people haven't communicated clearly with people in the organization what's going on. And communication is so essential for folks. But sometimes there's a school of thought when we're working with organizations and people are like, just communicate as less as possible, because what if we say the wrong thing and then we don't have to come back and recount it. And one of the things I love that Ron Heifetz says, who's like the guru of adaptive leadership, who I studied under when I was at Harvard, is that leadership operates without easy answers. Like, there's no easy answers when you are really doing the hard work of leadership. It's our best guess in the moment. So we have to be honest with people. This is where we are right now. Here's where we have clear. These are the 3 or 4 things that are stable. These are the 2 to 3 things that I'm not sure. They may change. They may change. I cannot promise that to you right now, that it is not going to change. You're chuckling there, but I imagine you're probably thinking about something else, something in your head, right? About like, but yeah, I can't promise that this won't change. And what I say to people who are at the forefront of like leading initiatives is, don't set yourself up to be boxed into into a particular corner to say these things will never change. No, if you know what the constant is, tell people the constant and tell people these are the question marks. And I will keep you all afloat or abreast or whatever the case it may be, and hear from your team. This isn't just talking to them, but hear back from them. So what is that? How is that sitting with people that these are the 3 areas that may or may not change? Because then your team's going to give you the information, and now you're going to know where they're at, and you can be thinking about, okay, how do I stabilize them throughout the process? Because I've learned these are their 3 biggest fears. So now that I know that, I can be much more thoughtful in how I interact with them and how I move the work along. Yes, language barriers do come up when you are communicating. You're putting just kind of like 2 words in there, so I'm having to assume kind of what you mean there, but feel free to elaborate. But I imagine, are you talking about cross-cultural communication?
Thank you. Just in general, what you were stating before in regards to communication within your systems, I think most people try very hard to streamline information, but then something always kind of happens. But what I find also is that everything is very coded. You talk to one person and maybe you could understand something if you're within that realm. Just like when I shared, and then now you're giving feedback, and then the conversation is based off of, again, an understanding of the field that we're in. So that's where I said that the communication becomes a barrier, which impacts the idea of us trying to support systems. And then again, that networking connection of who do you speak to be able to get that message across, because then when we're done with this, everybody in their world and their subjects takes that information and then continues off with whomever. And then again, it depends on who got the information, who didn't see it or didn't understand it from, again, their lens. So I just wanted to support what you were saying and then provide feedback off of what you're saying.
Thank you for that. And it happens because the game of telephone comes up. And that's why it's critical. You don't just name what you're preserving. Those anchors, those things I just shared with you, what are 3, the non-negotiable or remain same, we call them anchors. You don't just name the anchors once at the top of the initiative. You have to continue to name those anchors throughout. And you have to, if things shift, you have to be able to communicate why something has shifted. But you have to repeat them consistently. And if you hear that somebody is, that there's a telephone situation happening and people aren't clear, then it's incumbent upon us to address that directly. But, obviously you can't put everything in writing sometimes, because in this day and age, you don't know what's going to be lifted out. But you can work with whoever, your comms person, your legal person, depending on where you are and what type of work you're doing. But you can put something. that is general enough that if it was published on the front page of the WAPO, you'd be okay with it. But you still have to be able to communicate something to people, because that clarity is going to reduce anxiety on people. And it's going to begin to strengthen the trust and anchor people throughout this process where people are trying to figure out, what does this mean for me? So as we kind of close out here, I'll leave some space open for just questions at the end. My action step to you is, what are the 3 pillars your team must preserve to remain grounded during change? For you who go into organizations and you actually do this work with people, that might become a part of what you're doing with them as you're onboarding. Like, how is this information being communicated down to the parent, the student, the people in the social work department, the AP team? It's so many layers in some organizations. Each layer needs their own communication, their own conversation, and like you said, in their own language. And also, we tell people what pillar is most at risk. So I can say these 3 things are most important, but what might be most at risk, if I have meetings every week and we, do our, at the end of the meeting, some people have, at the end of the meeting, a clarity check. So at the end of our team meetings, we have a portion on the agenda that's a clarity check. Where is anybody confused about anything? Where do we need to come into alignment? It's a standing on our Monday meeting and Thursday meetings as a team. That allows us to get everybody on the same page before we head off and do whatever it is we're going to do. But you have to be able to say what pillar is at risk. So those clarity checks help me to know what's at risk, because I'm checking in with folks along the way on a consistent. So it could be that very great announcement went out about the change. And so communication was a very strong pillar. Having effective communication was a very strong pillar, making sure you communicate with people what's going on. But that could wane over time if you're not consistently reinforcing those anchors. So let me kind of round this out here and open up for Q&A. So as I shared before, for the remainder of the year, we're going to do one of these per quarter. So feel free, we would love to join you. You'll get a copy of this recording. And then you'll get a copy of the handout. That Diana, if you want to go ahead and drop the handout for me, please. We have put together PDF of basically what I just did with you here. So you can take it, you can use it with your own team. You can use it however you see fit. As I say, cite Black women. If you're going to use this, make sure that you give credit to where you got it from, but feel free to use it. We have made a commitment for the past 4 years in our practice of having some level of open access to leadership capacity building as a company. So everything I'm sharing here, we feel comfortable with sharing with folks. But again, if you're going through this change process in your organization, or if you know someone that is, invite them to come with their team. I mean, it's like an easy, free professional learning experience for people to bring their teams. So, I forgot to change that. You did a lot in 90 minutes. That's my fault. I used to do a much longer version of this, but during our time together, we did talk about building anchors. We talked about the importance of identifying what's important, what needs to stay. And then we talked about the importance of, let me move my chat box here. We talked about the importance of designing anchors and then thinking about what your core values are. And our, big mantra is you have to lead with humanity. You have to honor the people that's a part of the process. Your people matter. Your people are going to be critical to whatever it is you're trying to do. And once you sit down and set these anchors with your people, use them, stick with them, obviously adjust them as you need it, but continue to think about, if I have anchors, if I center the people in this work, if I'm holding them steady, that's just going to increase the probability that this is going to take legs. And change is inevitable, but humanity is not. The last thing I'll say here is that, pick one thing. You don't have to do everything. We always say in our sessions, all you need is one good thing. Pick one anchor that you want to share with your team over the next 14 days. And we always say resilience is not necessarily pushing through. We're trying to reclaim the definition of resilience. It's not about making people push through something. Resilience is about building a structure around folks to support them in the process. So resilience has to be built into the structure of your organization, has to be built into the structure of how you operate. Yes, people have to do their own work, but we have to design the conditions within our organization to do that. And people really aren't resisting change. Sometimes they're resisting predictability, they're resisting loss, they're resisting the fact that they can't, have a level of certainty in their job anymore because something has changed. So you can feel free to let us know how we did. That's a QR code. If you scan it, it'll allow you to give us some feedback here about our session today. And then our website is there, obviously, if you need to learn anything else. I'm going to end the recording part of this because I always like to have the Q&A at the end be without the recording. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to shut off the recording and then it'll be open for Q&A.